Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. Hello. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Stesha Brandon, the Literature and Humanities Program Manager here at the Seattle Public Library. And as we begin today, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, these are the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders, past, present, and future, and we thank them for their stewardship of the land. Welcome to Traveling Music, celebrating the life and poetry of Colleen J. McElroy, presented as part of Seattle Reads 2025. I have just a couple quick announcements before we get started. First, I wanted to thank our series sponsors, the Gary and Connie Kunis Foundation and the Seattle Times, for their generous support of library programs. And thank you as well to the Seattle Public Library Foundation. Private gifts to the foundation from thousands of donors help the library provide free programs and services that touch the lives of everybody in our community. I also wanted to mention that we have assistive listening devices available on the table here with the blue tablecloth. And if you find that you need a headset, you can grab one, or if you need me to bring one, you can just give me a little wave and I'll grab that for you. And finally, you received a survey when you came in. Those are for after the event. Please feel free to fill them out and then return them on that same table with the blue tablecloth as you're heading out into the day. So I mentioned that we're presenting today's program as part of Seattle Reads, and this year we have selected You Are Here, Poetry in the Natural World, which was edited by Ada Limon. And are any of you aware of the connection between Ada Limon, who is our current U.S. Poet Laureate? I see some hands raised. I love it. This is the poetry audience, right? For those of you that didn't know, Ada was a student of Colleen's at the University of Washington, and she had the most beautiful thing. She said the most beautiful thing to the Seattle Times in an interview in 2022. She said, "I worked with some wonderful teachers, but Colleen McElroy was one of my mentors. She helped me to see that I had to focus on balance in my work. The music couldn't outweigh the core thrust of the poem, and the story inside the poem couldn't outweigh the music. She was a great teacher." So I felt like it was really coming full circle to honor Colleen as part of a celebration of the Ada's Anthology Project. You Are Here. So that's part of the reason why we're celebrating this and Colleen as part of the broader Seattle Reads programming. But I also just wanted to say, like, my personal connection to Colleen was that I worked at University Bookstore for many years, about 10 years. And, you know, she was a professor at the UW. And so we had the opportunity to host her at the bookstore for poetry readings over the years. And it was just always such a pleasure to work with her and learn from her. So I was delighted when Carletta and Michael reached out about today's program. So we're going to hear from many readers today in person and by video. I am delighted to first welcome Michael Fausset, Colleen's friend and literary executor, to the podium. Please help me welcome Michael.
Good afternoon. Oh, come on. That's like my son or my students who ignore my greeting. So I'll just repeat it. Good afternoon. See, I have to do that with my child and my students. The second time is always the right one. Thank you. Thank you for being here. This means a lot to me. It would mean a lot to Colleen. Colleen lived for poetry. Colleen was many things, but she was always a poet. And it was her poetry that drew me to her. I am actually rather shy and retiring and avoid people at all costs. But the first collection of Colleen's poetry that I had was What Madness Brought Me Here. And there was one poem that really stood out for me and inspired me to show up at her office door with no plan. I had no idea what I would say to her when she opened her door. And she opened her door and saw me standing there looking, I guess, intense. And I didn't know what I was there for. And so I said, "Thank you for writing this poem." And I recited the opening stanza for her. And she invited me into her office. And basically, I never left. I was that stray puppy that she fed and could not get rid of. The poem is Juan de Pareja, who was a 17th century Baroque Spanish. Well, he lived in Baroque Spain. He was an African slave who the terminology, was owned by Diego Velázquez, a great European painter. And at that time in Spain, it was illegal for Africans, among others, Jews and women, it was illegal to exercise what was considered a profession, and painting was a profession. He worked for Diego Velázquez, and Diego inherited him when he was a small boy. So he grew up in the studio and played with paints and learned to mix paints. And Diego Velázquez allowed him to paint, and he had talent and actually painted. When he was a young man, there was an issue because this was punishable by death for him to be, this is familiar to something from US history. But the king saw one of his paintings and fell in love with it, loved the painting. So he was spared that fate. He was not put to death. And Diego Velázquez did a portrait of him, which is greatly admired in Europe and is housed in the United States. It's at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. So if you're ever there, visit it and look it up online and see it and be as transfixed, as moved by it as I was. And Colleen's, and it just overwhelmed me that somebody else knew this painting and was moved to, or paid attention to it, cared about it, was touched by it. And Colleen's poem opens, "The arrogant chin and black diamond eyes telegraph a sense of not belonging anywhere. So I fall in love almost too easily with this 17th century slave courtier. He rules this canvas, the sky behind him caught at the right moment of no gravity. Beneath his thick, crimped hair, a cape falling reluctantly from his shoulders in a shade of slate, too old to fit the colors I know." There's just so much there, just mastery of language, evoking for me Baroque Europe, which is what my dissertation was about. So I spent a lot of years researching and living and breathing that. But just the mastery of language, the use of words. I read that so many times. I memorized it without any effort and still recall it today. And that was my introduction to Colleen. I didn't know what I would say when she opened her office door, but I said, "Thank you for writing this poem." I think that was the right thing to say. And I am very grateful to her for her influence on my education, my teaching, my direction in life, and just being a wonderful mentor and presence in my life. I owe her a lot. And thank you for listening to my fascination with a poem and a poet. And next is Julia Boyd.
I'm gonna change my last name because I'm always first for stuff. That having that B there does that for you. Not only the B, and after that comes a D. So I'm here. I loved Colleen. She could make you laugh at the drop of a hat and share her wisdom always. Colleen was a member of a Black writing group, Black women's writing group that I met with Carletta and Colleen and Nancy and so many of us. And this is like old home week, except I'm missing her. She believed in educating you. That was her focus in life, and she was a great teacher. She arranged our first trip to Paris. That was my first trip to Europe. She had us take French lessons, which all I could remember to say was my name and the hotel where we stayed and ask for the bathroom. It was just magical, and it was magical being around her. She could tell funny stories. She actually edited edited a book of poetry for me, and I miss her greatly. But one of my favorite poems by her is Ruth, and it's the one I'll share with you today. Okay. I'm gonna hold this up so I can see it. And Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for where thou goest, I will go." Ruth 1:16. It took 27 years to write this poem. 27 years, Mama. And still I see you falling like a lump of coal down a chute, arms, hands, and feathered thighs, churning inside a tumbling hunk of helpless flesh, falling away from me. Your dress flying open until you were finally free form and without face. Since then, I have counted those stairs. I would like to say there were 27, but significant lies not in exactness, but in the panic of not knowing which step would claim you. I have saved that morning, the blood-sucked thud of body against wood, the back staircase of that red brick duplex where you clawed air. We had fought, I remember that. About what? Nothing. Grandpa's untimely death, my 16-year-old womanish ways, how someday I too would frail at my own daughter. So many flights, so many stairs. And you tumbling as my terror claimed me like Venus, without arms or legs to stop you. One moment you were larger than life, your black arms spread like the wings of some great vulture. The next step, missed and failed, distorted, plunging in wingless flight towards some evil nucleus waiting at the state below the steps, but we cannot go back. I cannot correct that split second when I fail to lean forward. Bodies will not reverse and tumble upward, unwinding into familiar forms, limbs intact. I have hesitated too long, and the landing is too crowded. What dusty things we will find there now. How you quoted Shakespeare for every event, from slamming doors to Sunday walks and bigotry, a broken lamp. Your jealousy and mine, too many unspoken holidays. For your one daughter, too many, or too many husbands for one daughter. How your senseless plunge into a void showed me more than all your ominous warnings, how the cycle of blood and pain has brought us both to this childless time. I have finally faced myself in you. For years, I have written poems nonstop, but yours were always more difficult. I have even tried dream language, but your image slips into some zone of blackness, even deeper in color than your skin when I angered you. How often has the venom from your blueberry lips stunted the growth of a poem? How often has your voice been with me? Wherever I go, you have gone. And sometimes, gladly, my need to reach out and pull you to me, Mama. For years, I have hidden hundreds of unfinished verses in the corners of dark closets. Read this and count them. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Lori Connor, Out Here Even Crows Commit Suicide, from What Madness Brought Me Here.
I'm closer to me. Let me push that back. It is on. Good afternoon. Well, see, Michael, you didn't teach him well. Man, come on. Out here, even crows commit suicide. In a world where all the heroes are pilots with voices like God, he brought her a strand of a woman's hair to wear on her wing. She looked sideways at the ground, silent behind the cloudy film covering her eyes, knowing she would be his forever. They cruised the city nights, each one spiraling away from the other, but always coming home to gather stories. Dark streets, bright tavern lights, drunks filled with beer in the gutters. The flicker of stars shaped like a hunter's arrow bent the stars that twinkled like babies' eyes. No babies for them. She was an outcast. He, a loner, a perfect pair. Winters had made him wise, and he avoided the single nest of summer. He told her about things she could see, how the dismal cover of clouds roils and explodes, and how the ground aches like an old woman's knee. How wood rots against the tide, good for hunting grub, how to fade and fall back into the wind. He translated her pulse into near language, their poetry so personal, even Peterson's field guide could not trap it. Only a stray hunter saw it, shook his head once, thinking it a trick of wind and wing, then turned his eyes north to search for the simple flight of Brant or Canadian. Those patterns he could understand. That last night they drank from the river, sucked its delicate cusp of mold, sang antisocial songs as if they were humans. When he flicked his handsome head to catch the drift of wind, she even managed a single tear. She waited through days and nights of grief, circled the city less than settled on the wires. The metallic conductor captured her eyes. She remembered how he proudly sang her name as he pranced from pole top to KV line. One last fluff of feathers, one sigh for all the unnested summers, one single scratch, one electrical surge of power of love. Then she fell, smiling, a trick he had taught her. So anybody, I think, who is lucky enough to have been Colleen's student knows her magic. She is as fierce as that dragon on her leg, right? And has a huge dragon, and as powerful as her work. And I am honored to have been her student and to have called her friend. She was that weeping willow that always bends but never breaks, just strong in all kind of storms. And she taught her students and her friends how to weather those storms. She taught us how to fight for our words, how to let them roll off the pen, and when we were ready and done, to let them fly. And that is the gift that she gave me. Next up, we have Minnie Collins.
Thank you very much and welcome again. And you will receive many more today than perhaps you will receive for the rest of the day. Colleen McElroy is like a nova, a star that has 7 sisters, if we know anything about that nova, or even Sirius as a tech name for some of us to use. My connections to her were primarily through an evening course that I took at the University of Washington. I was hired as an adjunct to teach, believe it or not, African-American literature. And I said, well, you got the #1 person here. But of course, the class was not at her convenience. But more so important is just attending all of her guest speakers and poets that she brought to the university campus. I dared not miss one because I learned something each time. And what sticks with me today, perhaps embedded in me today, are techniques of lineage, the sonorous as well as the sexual and sensual words that create and dig deeply into my desires to be as great as she, okay? But I'm still emerging, still flying. Maybe one day I will become the ambassador of Nova, Colleen McElroy. I chose the poem Diseases of the Earth. It's a long poem, but I'll see if you can tolerate it. It is so apropos because just 2 minutes ago, maybe now 15 minutes ago, I went upstairs and I saw Carletta Wilson's artwork, which is exactly fitting for this poem. And I won't tell you anymore. That's an invitation for you to go upstairs and see Carletta's photography in the gallery. Diseases of the Earth. At the end of the block, they are building a high rise. Across the street, another and another, until the street becomes an urban canyon. Mountains of brick rising taller than the spindly trees clinging curbside. The rule of the day is excavate before the future comes in with nowhere to go but up, until we look around and see our own reflections slumbering under the seldom trees of old growth forests, diseased and falling without a sound. Meanwhile, they rebuild the cities from the ground up and call it vertical living. How about that? The rule tears up roads even as we travel on them. Developers in a rush to call these peculiar towers villages. Some afternoons, I watch my neighbor walk her dog long enough to take my mind off the red wound of earth, where one wall for a new school leans into the wind as if seeking a better route toward heaven. The playground is pocked where black hoes have plundered trees, left roots exposed until the earth cries out in the old language of despair. Soon there will be a museum of trees, a thin line of scraggly aspens or elms surrounded by fencing, a sign reading, "New growth, do not cut until..." The number has been smudged by graffiti. Look, the neighbor's dog has cocked its ear as if to catch every word. It sniffs the ground where daffodils and lilacs have been dug. It moves up and down the curb as if asking for complaints, as if each time it marks the spot in urine, a record has been taken. And somewhere, someone is making a case against all the diseases of the earth. We cannot move fast enough, and we're gone too far to come back. Immune systems failing like stairs, gone over like fish begging for air. All around us, construction sites bloom like bizarre plant life spread by cosmic dust. Soon we will see nothing of the old land and its golden promise. Soon we will see only steel and plastic bordering what was once a lake pristine in morning air. Now we awaken to recorded sales talk, telling us how wrong we have been not to buy the latest remedy ready to boost us to near immortal status. What will become of us once our eyes are open? Where will the stars be if the city fills the sky? In Mali, the doggone have charted the heavens for centuries. Elders saying we were meant to travel the stars past the point where earth leaves us wanting more. There's little else to listen to in the desert except the song of sand and stars. Night falls suddenly like a lip clapped shut on a jar. There are no smudged lines, no wire and steel to destroy the rim of earth falling away from us. We are meant for the calendars of Sirius, not here where the economy of corporations eat away the earth. We were meant to stand among the gods, more fish-like than human. What will become of us if our eyes are not open? We can't find a way out. Each day we stand rooted to the same cycles, the same abuses, the weather that leaves us thinking we can turn back the clocks if we raise our arms in supplication. Just listen, that grinding sound you hear is the last tree falling as backhoes gouge down to rock and yet another high rise. We have lost our way and refuse to look back. We think we can get out, can move into space and travel the zodiac at zero weight forever. Already there are schedules, long waiting lists, brochures announcing the firmament, ours for the taking if our purse is fat enough. Look up. Out there, we could soar. We could hoard in a great cedar box all the diseases of the earth and move into a new dispensation, riding on a milk run through a forgiving galaxy. We could take that pox to the stars. And now, following, we will have a video. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Robert Lashley, and I am very honored to be here, even in video. Colleen McElroy meant a tremendous amount to me as a poet. If Gwendolyn Brooks taught me that I could write about the neighborhood as a subject, Colleen taught me that I could write about my neighborhood as a subject. I believe she is one of the most underrated writers in the history of the English language. She did so much for culture in the Northwest, and she deserves her flowers. I'm going to read in honor of her poem, Bone Mean, from her book, Queen of Ebony Isles. It is easy to believe she is primordial and will last forever. I have seen her stalk a single cockroach, fermenting on point until the crusty brown body lies belly up. She says by instinct they're too bold, but this is her way with all things. When I was 8, I loudly proclaimed the great distaste for green mints. The next year, she stacked my birthday in Vermont layers: cake, cookies, napkins, ice cream, in shades of green from moss to myrtle, mint to emerald, barrel to apple, bottle and fir, all reflected in thickly tints against my black cheeks. In church, she sings gospels with a vengeance. Among the preachers whose small black face too often reminds her of the husband she's tried to bury beyond memory. Every family has one, an old woman whose bile grows more bitter, who takes strong spinsters, shuffling their days like tarot cards, full of evil signs. She has stacked the world against her daughters. Now those girls ring her house like trees, sing her house like trees. Fat stumps of hardwood, spiderwebbing their mother's words into exacting patterns, their own words buried years ago, now petrified and turned into stone. 6 layers of lipstick and strong perfume keep them ageless, but she wants them hard and mean, as classic fossils. She is relentless and will not rest until she has plumbed and pinched them into bonsai symmetry, until they believe without fear that she brings all life to Earth. Thank you all very much.
I'm so glad that Robert pointed out the beautiful quality of Colleen's poetry. You know, when I heard that tree poem earlier, it reminded me of David Wagner's letter to Weyerhaeuser, the tree growing company. And in a way, Colleen's sense of place and Wagner's sense of place overlap into kind of a Northwest verse. In the days when Colleen first moved here, an African-American woman wasn't really included in the circle of Pacific Northwest poetry. And she was often pushed out of those circles. And she lived on the margin. She came down to Seattle. She had been a speech therapist professor in Bellingham. And she transformed her life into being a poet. And she did that with elegance and style. My daughter, when she was little, when Colleen would come over, my daughter would say, "She is so extra." But you all remember the nails, the beautiful thin fingers, the clothing, the birthday parties, the sense of poise and just complete elegance and style crossed with, "I'm going to tell you the truth." And that's what goes on in her poetry, I think, is this elegance and deep attunement to music while she tells you like it is. She's something. I'm going to read this for a whole lot of reasons. It's called The Prodigal Daughter. This is for the blue-haired colored ladies who praised memorization and good posture at all costs. This is for my mother who wrote warnings in Shakespearean couplets across the mirrors reflecting our image, who every winter saved money to send the blonde baby dolls her sisters gave me to the doll hospital so they'd come home brown as toast like me. This is for Warren, smart in his uniform, fresh from battle in 46, who let me tell the high school crowd he was my boyfriend. This is for his mother, Claudia, who taught discipline to her daughters by depriving them of all pleasures, who sold everything in her mama's house to the junk man for $300. This is for the blues Viola sang, her voice salty with urgency, who disappeared into whiteness, leaving dancing shoes, bunions and all. This is for my grandfather, who showed me the Anheuser's Clydesdales when I was 6, and he kept the stables clean. This is for my grandmother's chewy dumplings floating in a fragrant stew of peaches and spice, her stove with a stand-up oven, its emblem of a chicken hatching. This is for Mildred, who walked me a mile to school while the one at the end of our block stayed closed to blacks. This is for Jenny's family barbecues, Uncle Philip lifting slabs of ribs with the same precision he used to maneuver city dump trucks. That day we ate high on the hog. This is for my mother's spaghetti strap, high heels, and shorts, her dark brown legs that went on forever, both of which I inherited. My mother who kept me in fighting shape for the strange world I would encounter.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. I met Colleen when I was around 30, and I'm sure I was over 60 before I understood most of the things that she taught me. I'm very honored to be included this afternoon. Thank you. My selection is a poem titled Defining Life. It appears in the collection Blood Memory, which was published in 2016. In this collection, Colleen pays tribute to her ancestors especially the maternal grandmother she called Mama, her biological mother named Ruth, and her mother's 4 sisters, Claudia, Fanny, Jessie, and Jenny. Blood Memory is filled with memories, lamentations, and photographs. It is filled with lynching, devotion, and abandonment. It is filled with surrender and love. Here's Defining Life. We have come to take care of Jenny. 3 cousins come to tend to our auntie. We need her alive since our own mothers seem unable to bend our disobedient bodies. We have come to a house that reeks of life, barely pushing against death. Jenny hanging between the two, yellowed by jaundice and worn out. We have come, 2 cousins and me, 13 to 15, straining at the bit, thinking life is what we count on, groping for words to say so. Each morning when we awake, not where we want to be, but now for once we agree that here is where we are supposed to be. 2 days Jenny has hovered in the soup of medicine brought home from hospital. To die, they said, to die. We tend Aunt Jenny, our elder, our toughest teacher, she the barren sister of Mama's many children. We sob and weep and wring our hands, walk to the door and back again. What can we do, we who know more of life than any magazine? Then we see her eyelids flutter. Excuse me, let me say it over. Then we see her eyelids flutter, a voice so weak, surely not hers, a hoarse crackle that fills the air. I'm not dead yet. And we stumble over our own feet, ready to do her bidding, adding to our vocabulary the word remission.
My name is Paul Nelson, and I founded the Cascadia Poetics Lab in Auburn, Washington in December of 1993. We were started to produce and syndicate a weekly public affairs radio program, which at its height aired on 18 stations, mostly in the region, stations like King FM and KZOK and KJR and KGON Portland and Village 900 in Victoria. We interviewed authors and community activists and elected officials and eventually a lot of poets. And after the syndicated program ended its run, we continued doing interviews with selected poets who we found interesting. And in April of 2016, we interviewed Colleen McElroy. We interviewed her at the home of Luoma Durand, and eventually the interview that we did was transcribed and published in the book Cascadian Prophets. In fact, it was Colleen who edited her own interview and provided that a couple of years before the book came out. The book came out just after she died. I'm sorry to say that she did not get a chance to see her interview in print, but I believe it was the last interview she ever gave. I'm not sure about that. Of all the things to say about Colleen McElroy, 2 really stand out to me. One is that when she moved to the Northwest, she lived in Bellingham, and there was a curfew in place for people of color, which is hard to believe, but in her lifetime and in my lifetime, and it's hard to believe that that kind of thing would be feasible, yet she suffered from it and had to be inside after dark because she was a person of color. And the other thing, which is, I think, most notable, is the depth of her connection to what Federico Garcia Lorca would call the duende, a real power, a real force. Lorca was applying this to performance and, of course, to literature. And Colleen McElroy had duende like few poets who've lived in the Seattle area. And to illustrate that, rather than me reading one of her poems, I'd like to play audio of her reading her poem, The Hanged Man, during our interview, which happened in April of 2016. Here's what she looked like at the time, and here's what it sounded like when she read her poem on that occasion.
The Hanged Man. When the hanged man shits, we know death has taken over. The drool on his lips harden, where the tongue gargoyles out, and his eyes squeeze on a bit of last light. More often than not, his genitals stiffen, then hang tumescent, as if they, like him, have lost directions. The rancid breath rails clicking like vultures feeding, or something hissing toward candle flame, only the dead can see, while legs dance joyously in a melody only the hanged man hears. Feet pointed as if to pirouette, while hooded figures, job done, disappear in the cusp of trees, and black faces look up into even blacker night, full of screams, fading into the wind, like the hooting of owls or bullfrogs, croaking in muddy shadows, throats expanding, contracting, the story passed on and consumed in a single photo in a family album. An uncle, a cousin or brother, Ethel's boy, a Roman's eldest, dragged from his bed by men in shiny boots and white hoods and slung from the boughs of a tree. A grainy reminder of what grief we have never digested, and the tree itself still twisted and misshapen a century later, as if despite the southern sun, fire still burns brightly at its roots.
Rest in power, Colleen McElroy.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mona Lisa Saloy, speaking to you from New Orleans, Louisiana, where I'm born and raised. I'm in my house. You see my library where I've tried to replace some of the 5,000 books I lost in Katrina. That is not uncommon. Like a lot of people, I lost everything, but I would not have my life were it not for Dr. Colleen McElroy. She was my angel. She grew me into this writing life, so I'm honored to take part in this. I hope this works. And I'm just going to read a couple of short pieces that were featured in Conch magazine, which is published by Ishmael Reed and his daughter, Tennessee Reed. This is called Gandhi Dancer, and the second one is called Saturday Nights. I selected these because they capture Black culture in the neighborhood and how we live among one another. And this is what Colleen loved about my work, that she could hear my community and she enjoyed the voices and the painting of who we are as a people. So, Colleen McElroy, Gandhi Dancer. Son was a high yellow man, skin the color of russet potatoes, eyes the color of agates of cats. Even women whistled when he passed. So pretty, he could have been a changeling. Indian from them high cheekbones. The old women laughed, and them eyes, they said, them eyes could charm the stink out of a skunk. So naturally, the women in the family tried to hide him from the world. And it's 1930s rage and hunger. But he busted loose, broke out, stayed so long that when he returned, the family hardly knew him. Quote, as I live and breathe, end quote, they said, looking at his white Panama hat, two-tone shoes, and empty pockets. He just wasn't the same when he came back from the zone. All pins and needles, said he lost the way things smelled. His senses plugged with odors of death and dirt, where the boss man said the canal was to be, and his mother wailing nearly every hour. The handsomest of all her boys, downcast. Instead of staring holes through any woman, and son washing himself in Fell's Neptha, slicking his hair in pomade with little finger waves, his good clothes in a paperboard suitcase, the note to his mama on the kitchen table. And the next poem, titled Saturday Nights. Papa's girl had all manner of hair, straight tendrils that fell tic-tac on the floor, ropey coils loosened from rough poofs of hair. By late afternoon, the kitchen smelled of bergamot oil and rose water steaming like starch stuck to the flat iron. Each argued about who could fix one another's hairs best, while the hot comb sizzled to the click-clack beat of curling tongs. Mama said in slavery times, every little girl's hair was cut short to keep folks from guessing what man had fathered her. Like it mattered when the wagon came to the tundra off those sold down the road. Their mamas left crying in the dust. They used stingy dabs of Madam C.J. Walker's salve, remembering Viola, whose baby fine hair was burnt to the root by backwater beauticians. They spoke of Dora Emma's crinkly hair, a thick braid down her back and stone gray, and Fanny's flapper bangs cut razor straight. They talked queens like Nefertiti and Sheba. They talked fast gals and saints and Broadway blackbirds like Ethel or Josephine, come from St. Louis like us. When all was said and done, they burned the dredges, swept the matted hair into a pie tin, leaving brown marks where the kinky knots had been, so rats wouldn't make a nest of it, so no one could make a nappy wig of it, so no good folks wouldn't put a spell on them. They cleaned the kitchen with talk of possibilities, of cornrows and spit curls and crimps, those little touches that kept colored girls forever beautiful. Thank you, Colleen J. McElroy, Doctor, for all of your work, for all of the she's and he's that you raised like me. We thank you. I'm sorry Mary Snow's not here, or Elledge Carson, we used to call him Elowaj. They have passed too early, but we all loved you, and we thank you for being a blessing in our lives. And I hope Kevin and Vanessa are well. Rest in peace. See you later from New Orleans.
I guess I want to begin by first of all saying to Michael and Carletta and Stasha, thank you for bringing us together today. Going there. We will cross where the border is porous, where deals are unmade and papers transparent. We will cross where everyone can see us. Without suspect or hurry, we'll make it. To the other side, we'll seek a place of some safety where origins are of less concern than the craft of what we can offer. We'll pretend the guards are friendly and make our way uncertain yet sure-footed. We'll spell home for them in several languages. We'll observe all of the necessary gods, the prayer wheels and beads we always carry. We'll turn into the wind and leave no scent. We'll take it all with us and hope there is room when we get there. We'll cross before darkness can hide us. And no one can find us if the border disappears. there was a gathering last year that I couldn't make, and I didn't know about this one yet. So my dear friends Jan Wallace and Betsy Aoki and I met this summer, specifically here in Seattle, for our own little Colleen time. And we had, oh, there was a lot of laughter as we shared Colleen's stories. All three of us had worked with her as students and had become her friends. That was a common theme in her life, because when you were her student, you were seen. And that's what I felt. I was fortunate enough to just land in her poetry class when I was 19 years old. Oh, I should tell you, my name is Derek Sheffield too. That video person, she didn't say that. Yeah, so I landed in her class when I was 19, and I knew I was in good hands, that she was a good person and really interesting too. And then when I came back to work at the UW as a graduate student, and there's this big decision that you have to make, you know, like who are you gonna have be your thesis mentor? Who's gonna be your person? Who's gonna be your Dumbledore? And for me, that was Colleen. And I worked closely with her on that, and then she invited me to work with her on the Seattle Review. We worked closely together on that book, Page to Page. I was working with her when she took over the Seattle Review, and I tell you, the word of the day was color, because up until the time Colleen was the editor, it was all black and white. And then it started looking like this. And boy, did it make a splash. And then I went on and kept working with her as an editor at Seattle Review. She and I worked on an anthology together. I think we got along pretty well because I'm pretty conflict avoidant, you know. I just, you know, yeah, okay, right. When I was working on the Seattle Review with her, her desk was right here and my desk was right behind her. She shared her office with me because we had to. And man, there was this. Oh, she liked to call me Bob, beast of burden. When she'd make me, you know, move boxes of books and back and forth and so forth. And there was this fella one time who came in, a graduate student, and in fiction, I think, and she was talking to him for a while. You know, I'm over here at my desk. They're like 5 inches away right here, and very professional conversation. He's asking her advice about, you know, his manuscript and so forth. And then he leaves, and Colleen turns around to me and she says, if I ever have breath like that, you tell me. She's like, that guy had Mondo breath. And I'll never forget that phrase, Mondo breath. She would, and how many times did you hear her say, that's enough to drive you to distraction? And you'd be talking to her on these long conversations on the phone, and you'd hear this, there goes another one. And you're laughing because it's her place on Queen Anne Hill had a view of this crematorium. And every time they'd process someone, there'd be this puff of blue smoke going up. And I don't know how many, I wish I'd kept count about how many times she'd say, you know, we're talking along and suddenly there's this pause. And there goes another one. And as I moved on with my life and moved over the other side of I came to be with you today from the east side of the mountains, where I've been for, I don't know, 25 years now, and started raising daughters. I was so happy to be able to, for Colleen, to get to know them and spend some time with them. They still have the little gifts that she gave them, the time that, we shared with her. I'm certain there was something from some fair trade place in one of her travels, these beautiful gauzy bags that that they still have and they still remember Colleen by. And that was important to me, that my daughters would have some sense of this woman who had given me so much, who had led her life following her heart. Yeah, oh man, there's so much laughter. And Colleen, I want to end my portion here today and just, talk directly to you, Colleen, and say, there's a lot of love in this room for you here today, and laughter and celebration. And we are so grateful that we got to have you in our lives. And that's my 2 bits. And with that, I would like to introduce Rick Simonson.
Thanks, Derek, and thank you, everyone. To add a little bit to Stesh's little piece about Ada Limon at the very beginning, so everyone knows, Ada Limon came here to study drama, and is what she studied. So Colleen was part of that move to poetry. I come here as someone who probably publicly mostly introduced Colleen to audiences over the many years at Elliott Bay, where Colleen would read her poetry, her fiction, part of anthologies, her one major book of nonfiction, Over the Lip of the World. She also attended many readings and was very much part of the community or the audience engendered by that. And it's also, I just thinking about this because of all the travels, and I think most of us here are old enough to, although then we have our issues of memory. How did we used to find out about travels before the social media and all the other ways we kind of can link things? Because there would be a given night when someone would be at the store and someone would come in with news from Colleen, who was somewhere else in the world, and saying, oh, she knows about this tonight. She wished she was here. And so you're hearing reports of Colleen. I remember one going the other way, where it was actually a memorable night at the store in May of 1988. It was Raymond Carver's last public reading. You could clearly about to die of cancer. And Susan Landgraf, a poet, was on her way to go see Colleen, who was in Yugoslavia, as it was then. And we were talking about Colleen, wish she'd be there. And I remember writing a note to Colleen, conveying that feeling of that basement room to Colleen it got taken to her in Yugoslavia. So Elliott Bay started doing readings in 1984 in a sort of an attempt at a series. That was our first little floated out idea, and somehow it's kept going ever since. Colleen was brave enough to be part of that, and in fact, and she even inscribed, "Thanks for a great series." She knew she was part of that. So Queen of the Ebony Isles had come out in 1984, and that was a new book for her. So she came in October of 1984 and read from this. And several of the poems that are being read today were also included in What Madness Brought Me Here, which was a new and selected. But this poem is from Queen of the Ebony Isles. And I was a little bit drawn to this for all the travels. She also had her connections to St. Louis, her home. And I have my own Midwestern childhood. So I was always listening to what Colleen would do with that part of the world. And this poem is Monologue for St. Louis. Home again, and the heart barely there, when choked by clusters of words, thick as the clumps of blue-black grapes we snitched every summer from the neighbor's arbor, succulent pockets of flesh laced with green staining our lips and fingers. It is summer again, and I am home vowing penance for all my disappearances since that first summer when the arbor was clotted with pockets of grapes latticed on each interlocking vine. Now earthworms have trellised the arbor, and that crumbling heap of rotting black sticks cannot shield us from wind or words. We are the women we whispered about each summer. Familiar houses and schoolyards have disappeared. Childhood streets are blocked with singular black one-way signs, aligned like a lacework of warnings or accusing fingers. I am home again, and my cousins sit in their cloaks of black skin, dragging me through twisted vines of genetic maps thick with childhood vows. They remember each summer how each year I vowed to return home forever, but I am lost in a riddle of words. Home is a vacant lot, for its backyard clotted with a stainless steel arch and clusters of tiny parks sprouting like trellis work. In closing, some strange summer resort, my cousins have disappeared into like the shadows of beasts and bad air that infect this flat country. And I am home, a stranger, in love with words, with tart, sweet clusters of poems. Now, please welcome, it's so good to see her back in Seattle, Bibi Van Beck. Come back up. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to say thank you to Michael, Stacia, and Coletta for organizing this event for us to celebrate her life. Colleen meant a lot to me. She was mentor, professor, friend, partner in crime, as well as godmother. She would never acknowledge the loss until years after I left the graduate program. I first met her in 1977, my second quarter at the University of Washington, took a class from her, and we became fast friends. We were partners in crime. We used to go shopping for shoes. She had 7.5 AAA narrow feet like mine. She used to give me her shoes, and I remember walking in high heels, stiletto heels, up the hills of Seattle. She was a force to be reckoned with. She was a fellow foodie, and she was a muse. She saw promises in all her students. She loved them, and she believed in us even when we didn't quite believe in ourselves. In 1982, I had an early publication called Homegrown. It was a student publication at the University of Washington. I had a couple poems in it, and I presented a copy to Colleen. There was a photograph there of the group of writers on the steps of Suzzallo. And from that, she wrote the poem From Homegrown, an Asian Anthology of Asian American Writers. She was my consulting editor for Homegrown too, and that was when I published it. She always believed in inclusion and, rather than exclusion, and she always encouraged us. From Homegrown, an Asian American Anthology of Writers. I have seen this picture before, usually after a war. It is always faded brown-gray and slightly burned around the edges. The composition is much the same. Eyes full of innocence trying bravely to guard young bodies. The boy in front is the leader, and the couple there, deliberately not holding hands, are lovers. They're all poets. They're always standing on the stairs of some building where accordingly they learn by generation what lines have brought them there. The sun always washes their various sizes with a hopeful blur. They are always the ones who want to knit the old country to the children. And they are the ones who steal for a free breakfast bags of oranges and cookies for preschoolers and old ladies who smile their appreciation. Their picture hold names that are Asian, but it is much like those I have seen on reservations, or one my mother has of me near Selma with friends from my all-black high school, or maybe my younger brother, before his uniform was official. In this picture and the others, it is the last recognizable day, before the hills take what we know to be our childhood. And that girl on the right will no doubt walk a barefoot snow trail to death, and the intellect will gain hostility with each point of lost logic. And the writer will find no metaphors in bullets, and their own people will finally understand them even less than the rest of the world. Thank you.
I'm Charlotte Sherman. I want to thank Stesha, Seattle Public Library, Carletta, and Michael for hosting this event for us to celebrate Colleen. I first met Colleen, I don't know, maybe it was the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s. Carletta set up a meeting for a group of writers. We went to the Sorrento Hotel, in that room where there's a fireplace and those big armchairs. It felt very literary. I was giddy, I was intimidated, I was so excited. Colleen is who Colleen is, always was, beautiful, super smart, world traveler, multiple books published. I think I went there thinking she was going to relay some kind of writing secrets or tips on how to get published. And I think one of the first things she told us was, if you can stop writing, stop. If you can stop writing, stop. That was probably the best writing advice I ever received in my life. At the time, I didn't know it. At the time, I was deflated because I was expecting, her to like pump us up. Like, we're here for you, pump us up. But yeah, if you can stop writing, stop. It's something that I've turned to many times, dealing with disappointment, frustration, rejection. I didn't know how important that advice was until, like much later in life, I can appreciate it because as writers, for myself, I write to try to make sense of the world. And especially like in times like this that we're living in now, it's important to make that recommitment to why we're doing it. It may not be the fantasy that I had as a child dreaming of being a writer, but I continue to do it. And I thank Colleen for giving us those words of wisdom. My first book, Killing Color, Margarita Donnelly and the folks at Calyx Books reached out to Colleen to ask her to help revise the book. She graciously accepted that. I met with her in her home. She went over every line in that manuscript. I was mortified. I didn't know what that they call it imposter syndrome now. I didn't know that was what you called it then, but I was so embarrassed at how imperfect my writing was. And it was much later in life where I could just appreciate the generosity of spirit that she showed and the care and attention that she gave. And she embraced that dragon lady persona. She liked that, and I was scared to death. She could have torn me to pieces, but she didn't. She was kind and patient, and I'll be eternally grateful to her for that. Because she's always going to be, in my mind, literary royalty, I'm going to read Queen of the Ebony Isles it's also from Queen of the Ebony Isles, but also from What Madness Brought Me Here. I'm going to say this too. I read this recently read this memorial piece about Colleen and how important she was to this this Black women's book club in Tacoma. They relished her writing. They cherished her writing because it spoke to their lives. And I always think of her as like this grown woman writer. You know, she writes these grown women poems. So anyway, Queen of the Ebony Isles. This old woman follows me from room to room, screams like my mother, angers like my child, teases me, rolling her tattooed hips forward and out, steals my food, my name, my smile. When you call her, I come running. When we were young and perfect, we danced together, and oh, we loved well. All the husbands and lovers, children and books, the sunshine and long walks on lonely nights. Now she sucks me thin with her affairs, weaves romantic shadows over the windows and curses my sober moods, kisses everyone and insists on wearing red shoes. She hums the same songs over and over, something about love and centuries turning upon us. Each time she changes the verse, shifting the words like cards in a game of solitaire. The hot patent leather colors her mercurial moods as she flies about, her red heels glittering and clicking out of tune. She has seen too many comic strips, believes she's as deadly lovely as Dragon Lady and Leopard Girl. I resist, but her limbs are daring, oiled for movement. Without me, who are you? She asks. I'm heavy with silence. My hands are maps of broken lines. Without her, all sounds are hollow. I am numbed cold and cannot read the cycles of the moon, even the sun. The sun cannot warm me. Aloneness is a bad fiddle I play against my own burning. Bet your kinky muff, she cackles, knowing the symptoms. Then draped in feather boas, she drags me toward yet another lover, beckoning with her brash reds pulsing like haunting violins. On midnight blue nights, she screams into the eyes of the moon, twirling her war machine like some kamikaze pilot. Her heat bakes my skin even blacker. She's never happy unless we're falling in love or hate. She grows younger while I age and age, bandage wounds and tire too easily. She says, play the game, she says. When I complain, she says I'm hearing voices. She's hacked my rocking chair into firewood. I am the clown in all her dreams. When she looks into the mirror from my eyes, I want to float away unscathed, drift like patches of early morning fog. She thinks I stay because I love her. One day soon, I'll move while she's sleeping. Colleen J. McElroy. Wait, next we'll have Carletta Carrington Wilson.
I want to just say before I begin, this is so beautiful. All of your voices, all of the memories, all of the spirit of Colleen in this room. Philadelphia, winter, 1979. A friend returns from a visit to Seattle, tells me that they have cafes where you can hang your work on their walls. That's where I'm going, I say. In preparation, I send a letter to several journals asking about the literary scene in Seattle. There's only one reply from someone named Colleen McElroy. She says that I should get in touch when I arrive in town. Seattle, summer 1980. In the U District, on a telephone pole, a flyer announces a reading featuring Colleen McElroy. I introduce myself after the reading. Colleen invites me to a gathering at her condo. This is the beginning Colleen and I have had crossing literary paths for decades. And I find it astounding that I'm here today doing this program. Most notably, though, in 1983, she read at Douglas Truth Library as part of the series Northern Lights and Neon Naturals, Seattle Black Women Writing. And then there was Paris in 1992. Charlotte, Julia, Nancy, and others and I, we'd have never gone to Paris. I wouldn't even known about the place. It was at the Sorbonne. We read, we were starstruck, not only by the people in that conference, but us being there and also reading. The conference was Les Noirs Américains et l'Europe, or African Americans in Europe conference. Colleen, as Charlotte mentioned, we met at the Sorrento. Of course, I had this established relationship or connection to Colleen. And we were, I should say, fledgling writers. But we were part of the Seattle community. We were not part of the academic community. And I really appreciated that Colleen was willing to meet with us. And she didn't have pearls of wisdom. We just talked, and just the opportunity to, inhale her essence, to understand this is a really accomplished poet, writer, traveler, and totally the elegance, totally able to present. So that's all we needed. That's all we needed to keep going. I'm going to read from Sleeping with the Moon. The poem is Loving This Earth. To love ourselves, we must first love the earth. An African proverb. Those I have loved have worn golden hoops, have showered diamonds on a bird's nest to see the sun catch its own shadow. Those I have loved have feasted on loss, the salt of it still fresh on their lips. My loves have danced like drunken sailors, like children high on sugar and afternoons of freedom. Those I've loved have been bold and brazen, have left home almost grown with little more than a shoebox of breadcrumbs to trail them. They have been wise and reckless, constant as an itch before it dulls under the body's armor. They have been beautiful in their bodies, full of secrets of sex, of wild forests and spice. They have been scholars and fiddlers, rebels and revolutionaries. Those I've loved have been daring as bandits, and Lord, yes, poets who watched the moon and thought it their own love child, a light on oceans that carelessly mapped. And if I were to do it over again, I would, with more laughter and a confetti of kisses, with the scent of rusted earth, a spray of lavender, the moon at my side, its light in my hair. All praises to Colleen J. McElroy. She was totally a queen. Now, I thank you again, every reader who shared, but I want to open the floor to the rest of the audience who knew her. I know that there are people here who knew Colleen and have a memory, a remembrance. And just raise your hand. We'll give you a mic. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
We have someone here.
Good afternoon. I'm Adrienne Reed, and I first met Colleen J. McElroy, doctor, at University of Washington, and then had the honor of working with her as I work for her former literary agent, Elizabeth Wales, who's here, and accompanying Colleen to New York when she was reading for Cave Canem from the Blood Memory, and many wonderful memories of being with Colleen. But my favorite time in recent memory was when I decided to write to the president of the University of Washington to try and get a dedication for Colleen. And I felt really grateful that President Kause immediately wrote me back and said, I love Colleen. Yes, let's do this. It took 2 years, but that was that dedication in the dean's office, the conference room, was really important to Colleen at the time. And it was the last time when she and Jim drove up in her white BMW and came in to the event, and there was so much laughter that day. And I felt really called to continue with her legacy. And I'm so glad that Michael Fawcett and Carletta and Stasha and everyone who's helped with this are so passionate about continuing to celebrate Colleen and her work. And I just want to really champion and invite the possibility that her unpublished works will soon be published. Her wonderful novel that I think could win the National Book Award, to get that through, even though as Charlotte Watson Sherman so eloquently noted, the time that we're living in, it's really the perfect answer, I think, to the times that we're living in, to get Colleen's unpublished work published, and also her book of poetry. Thank you so much to everyone who celebrated Colleen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Edna DeGray, and I met Colleen I don't know how many years. I can't keep up with years, dates, and times, but I had a studio started in Wallingford University District. It was called Awajo Dance Workshop. And I was just beginning to start this little small dance studio business. And I was encouraged a lot by Colleen because I was always shy about speaking, doing presentations. Even today, it's very difficult. I believe at the age now, which I'm like 82, I really look back at some of the things that she often would tell me about speaking up and speaking out. And I said, well, Colleen, it's you have to have a certain amount of, I have the posture, I have all these things, but I don't have the vocabulary. And I was always sort of very conscious of that. And even writing, she says, forget about the periods and what do you call it, the question marks and trying to be so right. Just talk right the way you feel, the way you would just talk normally to your friends. Just start there. I said, but that's not going to be a nice presentation, you know, for my work and all. She said, just do it. So I did it. I mean, you know, and I also stayed in contact with Colleen for many years, and I became a teacher for Joseph Pilates' work and in the Northwest. So I did Pilates for many years, and Colleen took many classes from me, one-on-one. And you talked about a sense of humor. Oh my goodness, it was off the chart. We would talk about, you know, Pilates, and because I was always into this deep breathing, and that's what she took most about it. She really enjoyed the breathing part and the relaxation. And it was so funny because we got a part in Pilates, and I used the machines, by the way. It's called, you sort of, I'll just say you have to roll up through your spine and really take the breath, you know, breathe through the movements. Colleen was always sort of neat and wanted everything in place. So she was rolling up in this Pilates machine, you know, legs first. And when she got up there, I was said, well, you need to come down. Just take the deep breath and come down. She saw some little linens, like little linens on her leotards and tights. Do you know she was picking it off in this position? That's how neat she was. She didn't want this little lint to be on her leotards and tights. That was so funny because I thought that it would be scary to stay up there in this position for that long. But she finally, I said, what are you doing? She said, well, I have to get this off. So she rolled out very slowly through the breath. And like I said before, she had that sense of humor. And, but it was like, she would do an after laugh. It wouldn't be the laugh at the time that she's saying or doing it. It would be afterward. And sometimes I don't even question some of the things. I just sort of have to laugh. I catch on later on when she tells some kind of jokes or anything. But I did enjoy her, and she encouraged me a lot to stay into what I believe in, which was, she said, don't minimize what you can do in terms of just dance. Dance is very important. There's a lot of benefits in it. Just keep going and quit thinking in terms of making money because they're probably, because you're an artist first and you're a teacher second. And right now, as I progress on, I think of myself as a person who is a movement educator and also adapting a dance conditioning base. And I'm strictly going into now bringing dance and the benefits and well-being into healthcare. So I work with oncologists, nurses, and doctors at this point so that we can always think in terms of, along with health, with a wellness, movements, breathing, you know, all of the things, because right now we all need this. And I just want to leave you saying, through the breath, we move. And I really, really think about Colleen a lot of times when I'm getting ready to sort of present myself in the presentation, because it's still very difficult. But I also think about her and say, be yourself. Just put it out there. You believe in it, then you can make other people believe in it. Thank you.
Well, my name is Yvonne Henderson, and I was a friend of Colleen's. I wasn't a student. I'm not a poet. She didn't mentor me. I've been sitting here racking my brain how we became friends, and I'm sure part of it was that in those days, and I think I met her because I had started working. I think I must have met her like in 69 or 70, something like that. And there was a small group of Black artists, visual and performing, and my husband was an artist. But all I remember, the first time I met her, she came with her husband of that time, and we stood in my kitchen and talked forever. Now, what we talked about, I don't remember, But we did form a friendship, not one where we broke bread every day or whatever, but I was always there. She complained about her agents and publishers. And we had some things in common because we both had, our fathers were career military officers, and we both had been in Europe when we were young women. And I was from New York, she was from Kansas, but we understood as a worldly kind of thing how people interact with Black women. Okay, and of course, in Europe they didn't call us Negroes or colored, and you also, as a Black person, could be labeled different, among Americans, and I think she had to deal with that a lot. The woman who said, she said, if you could stop writing, stop, because sometimes she would work all night into the morning because she just had to write, and she would be exhausted. And when we first met, we were smoking and drinking wine, and as we got older, it was tea. And at some point, I had to leave in '94 and didn't come back permanently until 2006. And we still were friends, but I wish I had, especially this last couple of years, I had my own issues to deal with physically and whatever, made a more concerted effort to like, oh, I'm not going to bother her with this, or I'm not going to, she's busy doing this, blah, blah, blah. So I would pass that on. If you have a friend and you feel the need to communicate with them, do it, okay? She's very funny. And unlike a lot of you, I did fight her to the ground, and we had knockout, drag out arguments, but, and she was also very political. And in those days, I think the Black group, I think you guys might be familiar with,
Is it Black
Black
Arts
Artists,
West?
Black Arts West?
Black Arts West?
Yes, and it was all, I think there was only one other woman, and she was the woman, and have some books and things. And then in those days, there was Dr. David Lawrence, Dr. He's an artist, I can't think of his name, Lawrence, Dr. Lawrence and his
Jacob
wife,
Lawrence.
so it was just, you don't, Colleen, I was there when before she got her master's, and always thrilled with her books and things. I met a lot of interesting people through her. I'm not a writer, and the poems that I did write, I only let her read them and another person. I don't want to go on and on, but I wanted to make one other thing about her. She had a good heart, even though she might have, tried to be tough all the time. And I always felt I lived a boring life because she'd talk about her adventures and where she'd been and what she'd done. And I looked forward to that. But anyway, I'm done.
I'm Julia, and I've known Colleen with Charlotte and Carlette. I was part of that writing group, Nancy, Joyce Lynn. We would meet at each other's homes. We would eat good food and talk and laugh, and that was Colleen. She would call me in the middle of the night, and we would have these hour-long discussions, and again, I don't know what we talked about. Sometimes it was men, no, we didn't. Yeah, sometimes it was men, but she would call me, and the next morning I get up and think, why in the hell can't I function? And I called Colleen and said, Colleen, you got to stop calling me at 2:00 in the morning. Well, I had something on my mind. I was like, okay, but I learned so much from her, and I do miss her, and I think of her often, and listening to everybody read today, it's just brought me to tears. So thank you, Michael and Carletta and Sasha. I really so much appreciate it.
Colleen was very open. She was never unapproachable. She was very down to earth. I remember she even blew a raspberry at one of my lines of poetry that she did not like. And I'm going, You're a professor and you're doing this to my poem. Do any of you remember her red sports car? Uh-huh. Remember her sense of humor? She was full of life. I mean, full of birth. And I still can't believe she's gone. It's just hard. But I'm so very thankful to have all of you here to share today. Thank you.
So I just want to finish this. So, right, so the themes in Colleen's poems, dance, travel, and the whole naughtiness of the family, and then of course the seductions and the folk tales. It's just a very rich legacy. And even now, reading her work, I'm amazed by the complexity and the depth. So I thank you all for coming. Where's Stasha? Okay. She just, I thank you all for coming. Stasha, I don't have anything else to say if you want to finish it up, but
You
thank you.
bet. Thank you. I would just like us to take a real moment to thank Michael and Carletta. This program was their baby, and I'm so grateful that they reached out. Very grateful to both of you. It's a joy to be able to honor Colleen.